that, you know, that's not part of my job. It's not part of my position. I think obviously as a former teammate, or, you know, teammate of his in general, any teammate that you have, you love, you respect them, you want the best for them.
Okay, that was Christian McCaffrey, who had the accidental slip up that Brandon Aiyuk was a former teammate. Look, some foreshadowing certainly going on there with Christian McCaffrey, I think. Ultimately, the big question on the Underrated Pod tonight is, will the San Francisco 49ers regret having to trade Brandon Aiyuk, or will Brandon Aiyuk regret having to play for a football team like the New England Patriots that, quite frankly, don't have a quarterback that's going to be able to deliver him the football without it skipping off of the ground first? I'm just saying. I mean, like the reports coming out of New England about Drake May, let's just say, North America, they are not pretty. All right, so that's our topic tonight on the Underrated Pod. Listen, we've been around for about a year, 1 million plus views. Thanks so much for tuning in. Please subscribe and, of course, like this video if you haven't already done so. So, some thoughts for you tonight. Being based here in the Bay Area, I can tell you that the San Francisco 49er organization would absolutely love to give Brandon Aiyuk what he's absolutely looking for, which apparently is top $5 from a wide receiver perspective. I mean, just think about it. He had over 1,300 yards receiving last year. He's had 15 touchdowns in the last 2 seasons. To say that he hasn't been a key part, a key ingredient to the San Francisco organization would not be doing him justice. Now, if Brandon Aiyuk ends up on the Patriots, the Cleveland Browns, the Commanders had been rumored, but apparently are out of the picture at this point. And then the Pittsburgh Steelers, you know, 1 hour Adam Schefter says the Steelers are out. Another hour later, Adam Schefter reports the Steelers are back in. Ultimately, when you think about which would be the best landing spot for a Brandon Aiyuk, it's clearly not the New England Patriots or the Washington Commanders at this point. And when was the last time any of you ever saw the Cleveland Browns actually in the Super Bowl? I'm just asking. So I think ultimately the best place for him to land would be the Pittsburgh Steelers from a desire standpoint to actually make it back to another Super Bowl. But that's not what this is about. Let's be clear. This isn't about winning a Super Bowl for Brandon Aiyuk, and that's okay. This is about Brandon Aiyuk actually getting his bag of cash. And I have to say, that is absolutely okay. He has put up the numbers to deserve the point in which he's actually holding out at this point. Now, I think ultimately Brandon Aiyuk might actually regret having to play in one of the National Football League's versions of Siberia. Look, and now that Tom Brady is well into retirement and there's no hope of him coming back to the New England Patriots at this point, and with the word out of the New England Patriots training camp, things are really not pretty for Drake May at this point. Now, maybe that will change down the road. It takes players time to actually adjust to the speed of the National Football League. If you're having a hard time, though, adjusting to the speed of the National Football League during training camp, that should tell you everything you need to know. Look, it's probably going to take a little time for the Patriots to figure things out. So if Brandon Aiyuk ends up on the Patriots, I can pretty much guarantee he's not going to end up with 78 receptions and over 1,300 yards like he did last year with the San Francisco 49ers. Now, I think ultimately the 49ers are going to regret this move because there is something to be said about the connection between a quarterback and a wide receiver. And I think Brock Purdy's career sort of coincides, doesn't sort of, absolutely coincides with the success that Brandon Aiyuk has had as a wide receiver in the National Football League. Literally, both of their careers the last 2 years are closely tied together. Take that away from Brock Purdy, and we might see some bigger problems down the road. Look, I don't know exactly what the 49ers are thinking. They certainly have plenty of other weapons to sort of step in. But as we all know, the National Football League is not a safe place to make a living, is it? It is dangerous out there, especially for wide receivers going across the middle. So it's safe to say that if you can have the most depth at that particular position, you'll be in a far better place. And the 49ers have drafted well historically at that position and have a couple other key young up-and-coming wide receivers that I think they feel comfortable enough to plug in at this point. But it won't be the safety net that Brandon Aiyuk ultimately was for Brock Purdy during his first 2 seasons in the National Football League. I think ultimately, at the end of the day, the 49ers are going to regret not having enough money to actually sort of be able to take care of Brandon Aiyuk, at least come close to it. Apparently, they are so far apart that it's not going to happen. So Aiyuk is going to end up getting traded. Now, will Brandon regret playing for the Steelers or the Patriots or the Cleveland Browns? Will Brandon regret not having that opportunity to make it back to another Super Bowl? Look, I love Mike Tomlin, so I'll never count him out. But we are in the era of Patrick Mahomes. We are in the era of Joe Burrow at this point. And for the Steelers and Lamar Jackson on top of that, for the Steelers to overcome all of that and somehow make it to the Super Bowl with their 2 starting quarterbacks that they have on their roster right now, let's just say it's going to be a little while before the Steelers are, if you will, Super Bowl ready again. And the conference, the AFC conference, there's just so many roadblocks in front of the Steelers at this point. So while I'm sure Brandon Aiyuk would help the Steelers at least finish at 500 or above 500 and probably find a way to sneak into the playoffs almost every year, would he make it back to a Super Bowl? I don't even think that's the question on Brandon Aiyuk's mind. I think he simply, and there's nothing wrong with this, wants to get his bag. All right, those are my thoughts on Brandon Aiyuk. If I have to pick who's going to regret it more, I think ultimately the 49ers, and I think ultimately Brock Purdy could be hurt the most by a Brandon Aiyuk trade. That is it. I want to hear what your thoughts are, North America. Go ahead and drop them in. For the Underrated Pod, I am Dave DeBaugh, wishing you all a tremendous rest of your sports viewing day. To the guitar riffs we go.
You've been listening to the Underrated Podcast with Dave DeBaugh, presented by underrated.media.